Good afternoon, and welcome to the Believe Me Movement podcast. This is Ken Sylvester. I'm here today with Robin Alexis and a very special guest in our seat of honor today. Our special guest is retired Air Force Colonel Buff Burkle. She is a true American hero who had a near-death experience when her NATO helicopter crashed in Kabul. This is an incredible story of her crash, survival, and recovery. Now, Buff, if you could please share your story with us.
Sure, absolutely. I'll just give a little bit of background context on me, in that Ken's brother and I, Dave, went to high school together back in Michigan, which is where I grew up. I went to University of Michigan to go into orthodontics, and then got around some folks doing ROTC, Air Force ROTC, and decided to change my career aspirations and do the ROTC thing. And 27 and a half plus years later, I retired and am living in Illinois, retiring and staying in the same area where my last base was. I retired in 2018. So throughout the course of that 27-year career, I was stationed all over the world. I was a navigator, so that means I told pilots where to go in the airplane. Nowadays, everybody uses GPS, and that's kind of replaced me in the cockpit. But I think navs are more entertaining in that we're live, real people, and we can steal your lunch, and we can have So, but most people look at me and think I'm a pilot, and I tell them, no, I actually worked for a living in my Air Force time and did a lot of different things in my 27-and-a-half-year career. And one of those things, my last deployment, was I was tasked as an air advisor to the Afghan Air Force. And so I worked with, their director of training. And so I actually lived at a forward operating base on the other side of the Afghan Air Force headquarters area, just right near Kabul International Airport. My folks lived at the NATO kind of area right at Kabul International Airport. And if you think about a little sandwich, they were by the runway, and the NATO folks, and they all lived there. Between us and the forward operating base that I was on was the Afghan part. And so they had to travel back and forth to that. And so we were there, and we needed to go to a different part of Kabul from where we were by the airport there to go over to get ready for that meeting. So we were going to fly over, and because it's not safe to drive there in Kabul, NATO had a taxi, basically an air taxi service of helicopters. You just kind of put in your travel request, and then they scheduled you, and then you go to the airport there, get on a helicopter, take the 5-minute flight from Kabul International Airport over to the NATO compound, which had been there since 2001, 2002 timeframe, whenever they established that in Kabul. So it's a pretty bustling place, that NATO compound, but there was no runway. It was a soccer field, which was fine because the helicopters could go in and out. There's a variety of different helicopters, U.S., British, other NATO countries, commercial. Some of them were commercial helicopters. It was just a group of them that they managed that travel from other parts of Kabul just because it was not safe to drive. In fact, the day of my helicopter crash in October of 2015, there was a British convoy in Kabul that actually hit an improvised explosive device, an IED, and got blown up, basically. So kind of underscoring why we traveled by air. And as the British did the investigation of the crash, they found there were 10,000 landings a year on average into that little that soccer field. I can't say it was little, but it supported those helicopters coming in and out. It didn't matter if it was us taking a trip to the NATO compound, or the 4-star general, or whomever. If you were flying into the NATO compound, you're going to land at that soccer field. So that's pretty standard. And I had actually done that with my major that was killed in the crash. Her and I went over there with a couple of other folks in September for gender integration, NATO's gender integration, some of the work they were doing with that. So I'd already done this kind of profile. It was kind of nice because the forward operating base wasn't, I would say, austere, but it was not very exciting. It was kind of, it met the requirements with food and a gym and, a place to live and our office area and all of that, but it wasn't very exciting. And so it was always interesting to get to go on a little trip, right? And so that Sunday afternoon, the 11th of October, me and three of my folks were going to travel over to the NATO compound so we could spend the night there, get up the next morning, and walk over to the Afghan Ministry of Defense to support the Afghans giving that briefing of that project that we'd all been working on. And I was kind of excited about that because right near the NATO compound was the new U.S. Embassy, and that had a really nice chow hall. I'd been to it once before, and it was way, way fancier and better than my basic stuff at the chow hall at my Fort operating base. So I was excited about that. I had a friend working at the embassy. I was going to meet him for dinner. I was looking forward to working out at the NATO headquarters gym because you didn't have to wear your Air Force fitness clothes like you did at the forward operating base. I was excited about wearing, something with Michigan or whatever it was I was going to
That's neat.
Just the little things. These are little things when, I was supposed to be there for a year, and so you're looking at things to get you, keep you connected to home and keep you going, because it can get droll. It can get, a routine far from home like that can be, it's not always sunshine and kittens. It's just, it can be tough to not be with your family, not be with your friends, not saying, hey, I'm going to go to a Cardinals game tomorrow night or whatever it might be. You can't do that stuff. So it was little things like that to rally around, to keep your spirits up and keep going. So my folks set up that travel, and on Sunday afternoon, and I should say that over in the Middle East, Saturday and Sundays are not weekends. Theirs are Thursday and Friday. So it's not a weekend for them, but of course it is back here. So it's kind of a slow day, but not a complete non-work day. And so Sunday, we were going to fly over Sunday afternoon, spend Sunday night, get up Monday morning, go over, do the briefing, and then come back to the NATO compound and fly back to Kabul International and return back to work in our normal spaces. And so my folks set that up, and that was Sunday afternoon flight. So we all got together, went over to Kabul International Airport, got ready, and we were a little bit late taking off because there was an exercise they were doing, so just a little bit of delay. But there was 2 helicopters, and with 6 passengers total, 4 of us and a NATO French contractor, and then a Lithuanian major, and then a crew of 3 British officers in that helicopter. So we got in about 4:15, 4:30 in the afternoon in that helicopter, and we sat down, and it's not a big helicopter. There's the picture I pulled off of the internet that's in my presentation. I think you guys will put into the thing so people can see what a British Puma Mark II helicopter looks like. I flew in what we call fixed-wing airplanes, so I flew in C-130s and C-141s. I'm not a helicopter person, but it's kind of cool to get into something you've never been in before. Mm-hmm. And we got in. I got in on the left-hand side, and there's 4 seats facing the left and 4 seats facing the right in the back of that helicopter. It's pretty basic. It's not big. And so I got in, and I went to the left, and I sat down next to Povilas, the Lithuanian major, who was in the far back left-facing seat. I sat next to him. I put my backpack in the seat next to me, and then Roy, my contractor, was sitting in the front left-facing seat. On the right side, the right front-facing seat was the French contractor. There was no one in the next seat over, and Phyllis, my major, was back-to-back to me, and then Greg, my master sergeant, was in the far right-facing back seat. We just happened to just sit down. There was no real thought about where to sit, or, I didn't direct my folks where to sit. We just sat down to get ready for the 5-minute flight to go over to the NATO compound. And so as we started to lift off, and the weather was fine, it was clear, it was not cold or anything, or any weather was not a factor in the things that happened. But as we went to lift off, I leaned back in my seat, and I looked up front to see what was going on up front, because it interested me as a flyer. I'm like, ooh, what's going on up front? What kind of things are they doing up there? Not that I would understand helicopters, and then as I did that, I reached over and I kind of poked Phyllis in her shoulder, just below where her flak vest was, around the top of her shoulder, and I said, "Woohoo, we're getting to fly," and that's the last thing I ever got to say to her before the crash. So as we lifted off, as we lifted off, we flew over, and the side door was open, and the guy is looking out the back. He's looking for bad guys trying to do something to our helicopter, and he's got a weapon he's looking out, which is just standard. And as we came in to land it, and the last thing I'll tell you clearly of places where I don't remember, what I don't remember, and what I do. And as we came in to land, at that soccer field, there's concrete walls around it to protect it from bad guys doing things. And as we came into land, I was looking out one of those windows that you can see in the picture of that helicopter, because it's the left side that you're looking at here. And if you look at that, there's two little bumps on the front. Those are the two engines of the helicopter. There's a tail rotor in the back, and then that obviously the big upper set of rotors for that helicopter. And that kind of becomes important here as I walk you through what happened with the crash. But we descended to land, and the last coherent thought I had was we didn't finish the landing. And I remember thinking, and that's it. From that point till I'll tell you when I come back into my story, I don't remember anything that I'm about to tell you, but I have the British report. It's a really interesting having a 100-plus page report that's pretty kind of dry writing, except for your passenger B in that report. Then it becomes very compelling. And then the people who are part of the story I've gotten to meet and speak to, or I'm on Facebook with through social media. I can tell you what happened. So as we descended to land, there were people on that soccer field. And so the lead helicopter said, hey, we got to go back around and try again. So as they did that, our pilots in our helicopter were talking about some ground reference points, like the palace and a few other things that they were looking at. And in doing that, they lost sight of the lead helicopter. That contributes to the crash. And they realized that, so now they make a right-hand turn to regain visual on their lead helicopter. And as they do that, they don't have the situational awareness of the fact that there's it's a little white blimp that's got a cable that anchors it and tethers it to the ground. And they lose, what that is it's called a PTIDS, Persistent Threat Detection System Surveillance. And what that is that's really above the NATO compound, looking for bad guys and activity around the perimeter of that compound, because yes, we are in Kabul, and it's not exactly a safe environment that we're in there. So that little blimp is above that NATO compound where the NATO folks live and work, and it is there to look for stuff on that perimeter. So it's there. The pilots knew it was there, but they lost their situational awareness, and so we ended up striking the tether of that balloon. And if you look again at that picture of that helicopter, that little tail rotor in the back is an important thing when it comes to physics. I'm not a rotary wing. Rotary wing equals helicopters. If that little thing in the back doesn't work, then if you think about physics and centripetal motion and things, centripetal force, it's going to spin without that little rotor drive shaft or tail rotor in the back. So what happens is we strike that tether with the rotor blades on the top of the helicopter. It gets the tether gets stuck on the back spine of that helicopter. It goes down to about a 3 to 5 millimeter gap in the cowling, and at the 17-second mark from the time we impact that tether to the time that thing gets into that 3 to 5 millimeter gap in the cowling, and that's where the tail rotor drive shaft is. So at that point, the tail rotor is no longer working, which means that's not a flyable helicopter anymore. So the pilots are wrestling with this thing, and from the time that tail rotor stops working to the time we ram into the ground going over 4,000 feet per minute, 16 to 32 Gs of force, is 7 seconds. Yeah, it's 7 seconds, and those are numbers that were in the British report. Somehow they shut the engines off, and somehow we crashed back into the NATO compound. So the next picture is actually what I lived through, which is that wrecked mess of a helicopter that I mean, I don't have any words for what that looks like. It's amazing that anyone lived through that. But if you look at that photo on what would be your right side, you can see some vehicles. Those are the German vehicles. That's their little office off to the right, and then that white tarp that they have up behind that. That's the main boulevard of the NATO compound, and behind that, down that way, is the gym. And if you go around by the front of the helicopter, you go off to the right, that's where the chow hall is. Off on the left, you'll see kind of it's a concrete wall. That's there to protect the buildings that are behind it that people were literally working in when this happened. So this helicopter crashes into the ground, just after 4:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday into the NATO compound, and it crashed to the right, cocked to the right, nose up, crushed down to about a third of the livable volume inside of it. Everybody on the right-hand side was killed. The pilot up front, the crew member in the back, the French contractor, Phyllis, my major, and Greg, my master sergeant, were all killed. At 15 seconds, people are running out of buildings to start to render assistance, and they run to the front of the helicopter because obviously there's pilots in there. So they run there and start rendering assistance. What's going on in the back is that Roy, my contractor, has got his arm up and he's waving, and remember the side door was open, so I think they probably could see that. And then me, who has no recollection of any of this, is yelling, "Get me out of here."
Wow.
Yeah, so at the 11-minute and about 20 some odd seconds mark is when they get Roy out of the back. He's the first guy they get out. And then they get me out at the 15-minute and 25-ish seconds, and I was lifting my hips and helping them get me out of there because we all were in there. We were wearing flak vests, carrying a sidearm, carrying the M4 military rifle, which is similar to the AR-15, which is the AR-15 that you hear about in normal society. I had a flak vest on, and I had my backpack, and so imagine that crushed space. People ran towards that, and those people represent the highest of human character and their selflessness to run towards that, because there's jet fuel all over the ground because obviously the engine tank, the fuel tanks ruptured. There's, for whatever reason, there was not a big boom. I mean, I spent some time thinking about that in the early days of after this happened, of how do we not go boom, but there were people who ran out with fire extinguishers, pulled circuit breakers. There was a guy who was working there who had worked on Marine One. I think he was a civilian by that point. I've never met him, but I heard about him as one of the folks that ran towards his helicopter. There are 2 Marines who received the Marine Medal for their heroism that day. One I'm friends with on Facebook. The other one I got to meet when he was coming home from Afghanistan and I was recovering in Germany. I mean, meet the person who saved your life, meet the person whose life you saved. Wow. I will tell you that the Marine Corps are not big on giving out medals. I think the Air Force is a little more, we tend to, I think, have more decorations on our uniforms, our ribbons and medals than Marines. And so think about that. 2 Marines got the highest non-combat medal for valor for running towards that helicopter. There's an Air Force civilian who, a civil engineer who ran towards that helicopter, who I got to meet later at a speaking event, well, actually a media event, Air Force media event at the Pentagon few years later, who has the Air Force Civilian Award with Valor. And I'm not sure how many, if any, current people in the Air Force have that award. So lots of heroism as people ran towards that. Again, got me out at the 15-minute, 25-second mark. And then they get me out, and again, I was lifting my hips and helping them with a really badly broken neck, which I had no clue of. And again, don't remember any of this stuff going on. I have met the people who have told me these things happened, and some of the report stuff has the basic information, the times and whatnot. So they get me out, and they've got me on the side there, one of those sides, probably over by those German vehicles or something over there. And I was talking about my neck hurting me. And on the lead helicopter, the other helicopter we were traveling with was a U.S. Navy officer, and she had been actually working with my Navy officer. She had been in our office over at the Fort Operating Base, but she has a medical background, and she ended up, they thought we'd been shot down. It goes to kind of the security environment of that area, which is why we're in a helicopter versus driving. A lot of different things that we did because of the security or not lack thereof, but just it's not as safe as it is, going about our daily business here in the United States, although there are probably some areas that you guys, East St. Louis over here, we joke about, don't drive through East St. Louis, and, Vacation, the movie with Chevy Chase driving through East St. Louis and in their station wagon and having their tires stolen, all that. I mean, there's that kind of stuff, but this is one of the reasons we're there is helping their Air Force and their military get a better handle on how to defend their country to bring some stability to it, right? I mean, that was the long-term plan, view, whatever you want to call it, irrespective of political cycles. But so people ran towards that. So they thought we'd been shot down. Sorry, it goes back to the Navy lieutenant commander thought we'd been shot down. So she has got some medical background. So they land, and she comes over to this crash site, and she sees me, talking about my neck, and no one had stabilized that. So she said, "Stop, don't touch that colonel, lock her neck down." Certainly would not be alive or as busy doing hockey and other things that I do without her timely recognition of making sure my neck was stabilized. Another thing that happened during that little bit of time there is, for people that know me, I said the following, which has been corroborated by 2 or 3 people I've gotten to talk to. Again, no recollection whatsoever that I said, "I'm getting too old for this shit." So in the middle of, I talk about that because in the middle of this really dire situation, there is some levity that I didn't even know that I brought to the situation, because, this NATO compound, it's not got a big medical facility. It's not really centered on something horrible like this happening. But a little bit of training, and then the pilots, in the moves that they made, certainly saved the day as far as fewer people being injured, much less of a catastrophic catastrophe happening. But people are running around trying to render support. There are people running around for ICE because we have 5 people who need to be stabilized to be brought home to their families, not in the way their families would want them to be brought home to them, but to get them prepared for transport back to the United States for R2, and then the British to the UK, and then the French contractors certainly back to France. But there's all kinds of people running around doing things and doing selflessness, and just some really great examples of the best parts of our human character. So they get me, and they realize we've got to get her back to to Kabul International Airport so that she can get some follow-on treatment, because we don't have that capability here in our small medical facility here at the NATO compound. So they pick me up, and they're carrying me, and guess where they're going to carry me to? They're going to carry me back to that soccer field for a helicopter to take me back to where I took off from. And I have zero record of any of that, but I am talking and laughing and joking with them. Some of the folks I've gotten to meet who are part of my story told me, "Yeah, you were talking to us and joking and all of this." So they fly me back over to Kabul International, where there's a more robust medical facility. The main medical facility in Afghanistan, in that region, really is Craig Theater Hospital, and that's up at Bagram Air Base, which is about 50-ish kilometers, maybe 55 kilometers from Kabul. And so the first stop was at the medical place where I had taken off from. So they bring me there, and they've got me there, and that's where I come back into my story. I'm in a bed. I have a collar on to protect my neck. I wasn't aware of what happened. And all of my leadership is standing around my bed, and I'm like, where are Phyllis, Greg, and Roy? And they're all looking very serious because they know what's going on, and they also know how badly they know that my neck is not in good shape, and they realize that it's not in good shape. So they look at me and they're like, "Hey, we're going to need to get you up to Bagram. We're going to have to get you there by helicopter." And I looked at them and said, "What? I just almost died in a helicopter crash, and then I'm going to get a ride in another helicopter?" And that's it. So you've already had one. And then I also knew that was indeed the safest means of transportation to get to Bagram. So I knew that, and so they got me on that helicopter, and I went up to Bagram, and I spent the night at Bagram Air Base at the hospital there. One of my captains came with me as my non-medical attendant. I don't have the watch on today, but I usually wear the watch that was on my wrist that day. I have a friend who is she's an aviator, pilot, and she also started a watch line starting with women's aviation watches, and she's branched out to dive and all different kinds of watches over the years. But I had one of her new dive watches. It was this beautiful kind of Caribbean blue color face of it, and I brought it with me to have a little bit of color in it wearing my uniform. It's also a very classy looking watch. It's very professional and whatnot, and I wanted to wear that watch, wanted to support her, but also to have a little splash of color with my, my uniform every day. And so that watch was on my wrist. My phone was in my pocket of my uniform, my iPhone. That phone, I used that phone until it stopped talking to the network in 2021. So that phone was in 2015. And so they get me up there, and I spend that first night there. I don't really sleep. One of the things Carrie and I did is we walked over to Roy, my contractor's room, and we went in to see him and to talk to him. And that's kind of where sort of my healing kind of begins there with we're sitting there talking to him. And if you Google this crash, you'll find that it says 5 injured and 5 killed, when in fact there were 9 on the helicopter. There was an individual who was near that crash site who was injured. We didn't know about him until I'm talking to Roy in his bed. In a hospital there's 2 beds and there's that curtain. We're talking and the curtain comes back, and in the other bed is a Turkish colonel who was that 5th injured person in the crash. So,
wow.
Yeah, we sat there, and Carrie was with us. We sat there and we held hands. And now Carrie knows what has happened. I still don't know at this point that Phyllis and Greg have been killed in this crash. They kind of just didn't tell me that until Carrie. I kept asking. Finally, that night, Carrie's like, "Ma'am, they're gone." And so she knows all of that. She's with me. And so Roy and that Turkish colonel and I sat there. We held hands. And we started our recovery journey, our healing together. It was a brief thing because we just went to visit and we went back to my room. I made all kinds of phone calls. I called my family. I called because I had gotten my phone to make sure it was good for international calls, the most memory for lots of pictures and all of that. So I have a good, nice phone for the year that I was going to be there. So I was calling people. I called people back here at Scott Air Force Base, where this is the home of the Tanker Airlift Control Center, which I've worked in a couple of times in my career. That they manage the kind of the flight flow of our air refueling and our airlift aircraft, and our C-17, our big cargo plane in the U.S. Air Force. The C-5 is the biggest one, but the C-17, we have folks here that manage their flights all over the world. So other airplanes, we hand off that control to that command, that geographical command. Our C-17s are strategic airlift, so we maintain Air Mobility Command, which is the headquarters here, which I've worked in multiple times and was mostly in that command most of my career with my airplanes and the things I did, manage those. And so they are folks who manage that. I called some friends there. I called some friends, and lots of friends. My phone bill is really interesting of who all I called just to talk to people about what had happened or some aspect about what had happened. And Carrie and I spent the night there, and I was ambulatory. They let me walk around. So there's a picture in my presentation that comes after the wrecked helicopter, and it's got me wearing a collar, and I'm standing next to a guy in uniform, and that's a friend of mine who is the vice commander of Bagram Air Base. The commander had come to visit me that Sunday night. Pat came in. This is Monday morning, the day after, and he's in, and I take that picture with him, and you'll note that I don't have a uniform on because I was covered in jet fuel, and so they disposed of my uniform. The only thing I kept was my underwear. Everything else was taken away. My folks had to go to my room and grab me. You'll see I've got Roots sweatpants on, which I still own those sweatpants. In fact, they're in the cycle upstairs is my wear around the house sweatpants. So Roots sweatpants, they're awesome. that Cardinals T-shirt because that was a T-shirt I'd given to my mother because I've done 3 tours here in Illinois, right outside of St. Louis, and I'm a Cardinals fan. I'm a Tigers fan first and foremost, always, but I'm a Cardinals fan, and I'd given my mom that shirt. Well, my mom passed away in 2013. I would tell you, she and my Air Force mom were my guardian angels that day, and I now have Phyllis and Greg. So the 4 of those, I keep them very busy on a regular basis with all the crazy things I do. But my mom and Renee, my Air Force mom, certainly were there that day during that crash. But that shirt I had given to my mom, and when she passed away in 2013, some of that stuff that I gave her, my dad gave back to me, and I had that shirt. And so when you look at, what you're going to take when you deploy, especially for a year, I mean, a year-long deployment is not typically what we would do. In the flying committee, it was 3 months, 4 months, maybe 6 months. A year as an advisor, the investment in the training, and then the investment in the relationships you built with the folks you were advising, that's what they did, was a year. So it's a long time. It's so tough to wrap your brain around. So things like, I'm going to bring a T-shirt that reminds me of my mom, small little things like that to get you through that deployment. So my folks, that's the T-shirt they happen to grab. Of course, on that bed to my left is a Michigan sweatshirt because I'm a Michigan grad, go blue. And then, unfortunately, I'm wearing a Chicago Blackhawks hat in that picture. And I am not a Blackhawks fan. I grew up in the Detroit area, so I'm a Red Wings fan, and then I've spent enough time here with the St. Louis Blues, and I play with the St. Louis Blues Warriors, which is a disabled veterans team, that I'm absolutely not a Blackhawks fan. But I wear baseball hats all the time. I had brought several with me on the trip. They just didn't grab one from my room. And imagine, I told you I was, in this helicopter crash, I needed a haircut and a perm desperately. I was, in fact, hoping maybe during my time there at the NATO compound I would be able to get that because my hair is very fine and limp. And so
God. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Every haircut's a perm, and so my hair was super long, and it was skanky, for lack of a better word. Imagine that. I've been wearing, my helmet, and then I've been in a helicopter crash. So yes, I desperately need a baseball hat. So Carrie, who's from Chicago, goes back to her room and brings me that Blackhawks hat, which it's a lot of fun here when I tell my story in St. Louis because people just go, "What are you doing wearing that hat?" I'm like, well, here's why. And I will tell you, I still have that hat because when my brother came over to be my non-medical attendant when I was in Germany recovering, he brought a Michigan hat. So I traded up with Carrie. I gave her a Michigan hat for her St. Patrick's Day Blackhawks hat. So that's what that hat is. So I'll have some meaning. I took this picture with Pat Schlickenmeyer. He's a C-130 guy. We had traveled over together on the deployment. That's how I got to know him. And so he had come in to visit me. And while he was there visiting, the medical folks come in. They're like, "Hey, ma'am, we've got a C-17 that's going to come pick you up, and we're going to litter you on the plane," meaning they're going to carry me onto the plane. And I immediately said, "No, you are not." One, I'm a crew member, so in my uniform, I wear a flight suit, or I have wings on my uniform, kind of like a football player, a hockey player, or even basketball. They don't get littered off the field. If they can at all do it under their own power, they will, even if they have to have 2 guys on either side dragging them, they will come off the field under their own power. Same kind of thinking with me. I'm an aircrew member. I'm not getting littered onto an airplane. 2, I walked into this effing country. I want to walk out. And so I may have used a different word. If you talk to the 3-star vice of Air Mobility Command, he was telling people and using a different word, which is probably true. But that was my view is I walked into this effing country. I want to walk out. And then the third thing was I lost 2 people in this crash. I want to respect and honor them by walking out. Can we make that happen? And again, I had really no idea of how badly broken my neck was, what was going on with that. And I had no shoes. They were very smart. You see if you look at those pictures, you see I've got the collar on to protect, to keep from dying or doing anything to finish the process of that break that had happened. But I had no shoes. It's probably a good idea. But I had those, if you've ever been in the hospital socks with the different colors, and I was yellow with the little bumps, these little traction bumps on the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
That yellow, which I would say maize for me being from Michigan and going to Michigan, is probably troublemaker colored socks. Be mindful, this person's a troublemaker. But what they did is they led me to the ramp of the plane, the back of the plane. They let me walk into that airplane under my own power, and then they put my litter that I laid on for the flight onto the stanchions in the back, and away we went. And you've just moved me to tears. That's so beautiful. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's that's why the pictures are really important. But them giving me that opportunity was so important to the foundation of my healing process. Getting to leave under my own power was really important. I mean, I don't know how many hospital visits you guys may have made, but I've had since this happened. I had pancreatitis a few years back, and wheeling me around in a wheelchair, it drove me nuts to go to x-rays. I'm like, I can walk under my own power. No, we have to. I'm like, why? There's so many little things that they do that it kind of goes against the whole recovery process. So these guys, that is an example, and I tell medical folks, never forget that your case is a person, and that there may be people where that was not the right answer to allow them to do that. But in my case, it was a huge piece of the foundation of my recovery journey. So we get into that airplane, and oh, by the way, my friends back here were finding that airplane to change its mission to come and get me. And I think there was supposed to be one of the British on there with me, but I don't think they were stable enough. So it was literally an airplane for me. And that's one of the two most important airlift missions your United States Air Force does, is aeromedical evacuation, and the other one is bringing Phyllis and Greg home.
You're moving me to tears again.
Well, I get very emotional with you. You can hear it in my voice if you see me. When I say that, it's very profoundly important to me, because my first evaluation flight in the Air Force as a second lieutenant was an air evacuation mission from Guam, the island of Guam, to Hickam Air Base in Hawaii. It was a premature baby, and we were the crew and airplane tasked to bring that baby back to Hawaii for treatment, and I got an evaluation while we did that. So that was my first evaluation. I have commanded a squadron that has flown those missions. We flew some of those in Afghanistan in 2001, 2002. I've worked at the Tank Air Control Center. We have commanded and controlled those. And I'm a customer of the system too, which is a very solemn honor to have all three aspects of that. I'm not aeromedical evacuation myself, but I've flown them, I've planned them, I've done command and control of them, and I've been a customer, and that's pretty profound. But yes, those are the two most important missions we do when it comes to airlift, is bring folks home we've lost, and then the air medical evacuation missions, because those save lives. And I mean, the faster we can get someone away from the place that something has happened to treatment, the better their chance of survival. They call it the golden hour. And in my case, the guys here were told, I wasn't expected to live, and understand that these folks here, these generals back here, are people I've worked with most of my career. And so we do these missions for people we don't know, but you can imagine when they're working for waivers to get this airplane through and all of that, that it's someone makes it a little bit more intense, if you will. So I got to Germany on that Monday the 12th, and now I'm going to meet with a neurosurgeon. And I should tell you that when this happened, I was 47 years old. I'd never had an IV or a surgery in my life. Getting a cavity filled was this horribly scary experience for me. I'm a wuss when it comes to pain. I mean, I don't like getting shots because it hurts, right? I'm kind of a wuss. So here I have this neurosurgeon sitting across the table from me, telling me that he is going to have to put a halo on me, and he's going to have to cut my neck open, move my windpipe out of the way. Once he's put that halo on to stabilize my neck, he's going to have to cut my neck, move my windpipe out of the way, pull out a crushed disc, and then put in a little bone plug, a little titanium butterfly cover, and let those fuse, and to do that for 3 months and see how things go. And the reason why is if you look at that next picture that comes after the picture of Schlick and I standing there in the hospital, you'll see why the situation was so dire. For people that remember Christopher Reeve, I have the same injury
yes.
that he did. Yeah, he fell off his horse and broke his neck and had a hangman's fracture of his C2, which is that first picture. That's my C2 vertebrae, so the second one from the top. And that's called a hangman's fracture because when a hangman hangs someone, they want their neck to look like that. So that was cracked and a little twisted, which is why we needed, the halo. The next picture is a side-by-side of the side of my neck. The left view, you can see in the maze circle, that's the broken little piece of my C2 hanging out. And then a little lower down in the blue circle, that's the two vertebrae, my C5-6. You can see they're really close to each other, which is where that disc is in between there. In my Air Force medical records, it says herniated, but I would submit that that's kind of crushed in there. That's more probably an apt description than saying it was herniated. And then on the right-hand side is the photo that blows medical folks' minds, because that shows a near-complete internal decapitation there. I was giving a presentation down in Atlanta several years ago to some Air Force Reserve air medical evacuation folks, and in that room, and someone way in the back sees that picture and they say, "Holy shit!" Because to them, they look at that and go, "I don't even know how you're alive, much less intact, much less you said you're playing." At the time that I gave that presentation, I hadn't started playing hockey yet, but I was active and doing my thing, and now I do play hockey, and I'm one of the older people on our hockey team playing ice hockey. It's not a Czech league, but we do collide, and it's a physical sport, even if it's not supposed to be without the checking. So that right there is the picture that I shouldn't be here. I should be in Arlington National Cemetery or some other national cemetery, or short of that, I should be in a wheelchair, or I should have some sort of disability that limits my ability to do things, which I do have a VA disability rating, but that's the situation. So that's what drove the need to wear the halo for the broken C2, which meant I got 6 screws put into my skull. I wore a vest with 4 poles for 3 months. And the purpose of that was to put that C2 kind of into a traction to see if we could get it to come back together and start to fuse and heal, and to see how stable that was. Now, I know my neurosurgeon kind of looked at me and went, "Yeah, this is probably not going to go great, 47-year-old woman, whatever," but he did that first versus fusing C1, 2, and 3. And if he had done that, I would have been kind of like a robot, much like I was when I wore the halo. The cool unintended benefit of wearing the halo is that fusion, the blue part where we put the bone plug in, but took out that crushed disc, put in a little bone plug, and then put a cover on to make sure it doesn't pop out. That was kind of in a nice traction for the first 3 months of that fusion. And so to me, I think that laid a great foundation for that to have a good start in fusing together nice and stably, so that I would be, because I've had some friends have that discectomy, is what that's called, in that exact same place, and theirs hasn't been as successful because they spent their time wearing the soft collar, like what you see, some of the pictures that I'm in. They didn't have the halo on for the other injury, and I think that kind of was a benefit for that other part of my injury. And so that's what
if I could
did. If
I just make a quick comment. I'm looking at these pictures, the side-by-side pictures you're describing, and I'm not a medical person, but that sure does not look good. Wow.
No, no, that is not good. And that's why, I tell people you got to have my pictures. I can tell you, and it's still a compelling story, but the photo of the actual wrecked helicopter out of the British report.
Doesn't even look like a helicopter.
No, it doesn't. When you look at that photo, because the other photo is just one I pulled off the internet. I pulled, Googled British Puma Mark II and pulled that one. But that one, the wrecked one, that's actually from the British report. that I have a copy.
There was not much left of it. I mean, in looking at it, if I didn't know it was a helicopter, I don't think I could figure out it was a helicopter.
Yep. I mean, I can see it because I can see the key parts of it from the other photo. But yeah, absolutely. And then as far as my neck, yeah, that's why I tell people, hey, I need to have slides because you got to see these crazy pictures. And to go back to the picture with Schlick for a moment, I wanted to highlight something that's kind of important. That remember that, well, I had a whole bunch of people supporting me on my deployment through social media. I mean, my deployment to Afghanistan is where I learned about the fact that Facebook Messenger has a video capability. I didn't even know that 10 years ago until I was deployed, that you could have a video conversation from Facebook or audio. So I learned a lot of things about social media, and social media was really an important way that people were supporting me, and I was sharing what I could about what I was doing. And so an important thing is, how do I let people know that I've been in this crash and I'm okay? I'm injured, but I'm okay, because we have two families that are being told the worst news you could ever get. And there's a process, and there's a kind of a timing that goes with that. You know, when you hear about a death in the military, we don't announce the names of the people we've lost until we've notified the family and we give them some time. I think it's either 24 or 48 hours to be with that information before those names go public. And so I know that's happening for my two folks' families. Mm-hmm. But how do I, as a human being, let people know I'm okay? I'm injured, but I'm okay. So what I did is I took that photo right there with Schlick with that Blackhawks hat, and I put it on Facebook, and I just said, one tough bird, T-U-F-F, or buff, T-U-F-F, bird. And I put that out on Facebook. And I had friends that later told me they were glad to see that because they were really worried because I hadn't posted for a little while. And they saw that, and they understood something had happened, but that I was still around. So that picture is pretty important with understanding how could I let the folks that were supporting me in my deployment know something had happened. So that picture is important, and to go back to and highlight that. So now I've got 3 months of wearing that halo, and the doctors and Longstool Regional Medical Center had the capability to have me there for that 3 months, because there was some conversation about moving me to the Air Force main hospital at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. But Longstool had the space. They really continuity of care in this particular situation. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wanted that neurosurgeon to be the guy to decide to take it off, and did it work? Because he was really looking at let it get going for 3 months, take it off, and let's see how stable that C2 is relative to the rest of my vertebrae, and then go from there. If it wasn't stable, then he would fuse C1, 2, 3. And then, of course, the 5-6 was already in process of fusing. So I stayed there because I had deployed from Canada. I was on an exchange tour when the Air Force Colonels Group tasked me with this deployment. So I left Canada for an U.S. Air Force deployment. So all of my cats, cars, and stuff were in Ottawa, Ontario, where I was stationed. So they weren't going to send me back home because I was in a different country. So they elected to, and there was a little bit of a battle between the Air Force and Longstool about the best place for me to be, and ended up I was going to stay there. So I stayed there for the 3 months that I wore that halo, and I don't want to take too much time with that because I could talk all day, but that's where I had the opportunity to get out and do some things, have some opportunities for some continued healing. I got great care. They flew a family member over to be with me because we had to clean those 6 screw holes twice a day. They called them the Air Force, the military medical community calls. I had these titanium screws in my skull, and they called those pins, and so we had to clean the pin sites twice a day. So my brother was the first one who came over for 2.5 weeks. Then a sister came, then my dad, and then another sister. My youngest sister couldn't come over because she was working for Ford and I think she was fairly new at that time. She couldn't get off of work to come over, so my dad stayed for 7.5 weeks, which was an adventure.
Wow.
and he had never been to Europe, and I didn't have a car. I didn't want him having a car over there because he had never driven over there, and we had plenty of people transporting us and doing things. But the main thing was just to kind of help me with some of the things of living, because it's hard to put get shirts on, taking a shower. I could take the bottom part, but I needed help washing my hair. I needed help with the little dude wipes, the shower wipes that we have now, to clean in and around that halo vest and that upper part of my body. We had to figure out ways to do that. And so those are some of the, when you look at my takeaway slide that I don't want to spend a lot of time on today, but those are some of the key things I learned in this recovery journey. Is one of them is, you got to bloom where you're planted. You got to really figure out, how do you make the best of where you're at. And sometimes you can be in a really good place and still not like it. I mean, when I was stationed in Monterey, California for Naval Postgraduate School for 18 months, I got a master's degree there, and there were people that was my favorite assignment in the Air Force, but there were people that didn't like it there. I'm like, what? It's gorgeous there. I would love to have gone there in retirement, but financially that would not have been a smart move, unfortunately. But there were people that hated being there. I'm like, whoa, this is a great place. I was stationed in Dyess, Texas, outside of Abilene, Texas, twice, and that is not the garden spot of the world. But that community is well known for supporting that military base, to the point where the award the Air Force gives out every year to the community of the year that supports the base that's near it is called the Abilene Trophy, because they won it so many times they finally said, hey, look, man, we're just going to name it for you guys. You can come help us present it every year. So there's a goodness there, even though it's West Texas and kind of not very exciting. There was the community, and that was good. So it's about kind of blooming that. So we were figuring out how do we wash Buff's hair and how do we get around. And I had friends that from my career and elsewhere. We had the Wounded Warrior Project did things for us. That's the charity. The USO was a really fabulous place to go, and they had people make meals and do different things to kind of break the monotony of just being there. I was there in the fall, so there were Christmas markets. We didn't just sit in my room and feel sorry for ourselves. We went out and did things. I mean, Phyllis and Greg would never let me sit in my room and feel sorry for myself. I went out. We did stuff. I mean, my dad had never been to Europe. My brother several of my siblings had never been there before. And so it was really neat to kind of get some of those experiences over the course of that 3 months of healing. And again, many great stories. I could talk to you all day about some of the really cool stories that go with some of these pictures are in here. I just don't want to dwell on that. Really, I just want to talk about what happened and then, the pathway of recovery. And so I wore that halo. We started figuring out how to work out. I figured that one of my favorite workout things is push-ups. I realized that doing push-ups with a halo is probably not the smartest thing. But
not the easiest either.
I probably could have. Yeah, I mean, I could have probably done it, but it would not have been the pressure and stress on my neck would not have been good for that. But I did figure I could do planks. Just putting, just hanging out on your elbows and doing that. And I was up to 4 planks. This is one where I highlight getting in shape for your life, because you never know when you might need it. That's really important. If you take care of yourself or are always trying to do that, I mean, I'm literally never in the shape I want to be in, but I'm always trying to get there. And that can include things like napping. I went and helped at hockey practice this morning, and hockey practice is at 6:30 in the morning. I'm not a morning person. For me, on the Illinois side of the river here where I live, to go to the rink, which is west of St. Louis, and I'm east of St. Louis, I get up before 4 o'clock, get moving, eat my breakfast, take care of feeding all the fools that live in this house, the fools being my cats, and then it's about a 50-minute drive. So it's an early morning, and so I know that somewhere in that day, if I can fit it in, it's good to take a nap. So I did that. I mean, those are equally important. It's equally important to have a day just to relax. It's not just about physical fitness. It's about, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, all those different things that getting in shape for your life is a worthy pursuit, so that if you happen to find yourself in a helicopter crash, you may have a better recovery process than if you didn't. Or, knee replacement, hip replacement, cancer, whatever it is, the things that life throws our way, if you are trying to get in shape, you're going to do that. So with that in mind, they had a gym in the dorm that I lived in, because I only spent 5 days total in the hospital the whole time I was there, the first 5 days after the surgery, and then I was in a dorm, and they had a gym in the basement. So me and whoever was with me would go down there, and I started riding the exercise bike, and then I transitioned over to the cross trainer. We were doing a lot of walking and Christmas markets and keeping active. I bought some dumbbells at the Air Force BX at the Air Force Base, Ramstein Air Base, and was using those and just trying to work on getting back into shape and complementing my recovery journey, because that's always been an important part of who I am. Mm-hmm. And again, never in the shape I want to be in, but always trying to get there or trying to maintain or do something, because it's also good for your mind, heart, and soul to do physical workouts and things like that. A really important underpinning thing about all of this recovery is that my bumper sticker of everything when I give a presentation is that resilience is not an individual sport. We don't get through life alone. We're not meant to do that. And resilience is, if I met either one of you in person, I know I could look at you and know you are a resilient person, but the resilience that lies within you can't get to on your own. We need each other's help. We need each other to support us in our connections to access that resilience that we leverage when we need it. And so connections really, really are super important. And whether it's the connections that I made through this journey or the connections I had in place that lifted me up. I mean, I showed up to Germany with a small little bag of stuff. I didn't have shoes, as I said. I had no credit card because they didn't grab that. I had my military ID. I had an iPad, and I think I had my MacBook Air. That was about it, and a few other small things. When I left Germany, I sent 35 priority mailboxes home, not just the stuff that I bought or people had brought from my room and my stuff in Afghanistan, but people sent me things. I mean, I have a high school classmate that Dave and I went to school with. She's a Michigan State grad. She sent me a Michigan Tervis tumbler that literally, that's my coffee cup in the morning. I used it again this morning. She sent me that, and I used it there, and I've been using it ever since. I had so many different people. Just the outpouring of support was amazing. I'd had that support to some degree while I was deployed, but even more so as I was recovering. So those connections are huge. They're an underpinning of being a human being. We cannot do our best without those connections. And so resilience is absolutely not an individual sport. It's really important to me. I highlight that is super, super important. One really interesting experience I got after, because I did the 3 months in Germany. At the end of the 3 months, we took the halo off. I took 10 days. We did some x-rays. The neurosurgeon said, "You're good. Don't need any physical therapy. You can go back to Canada and go back to work," because I spent a few more months in Canada before I moved here to the St. Louis area for my last assignment. And I got here, and I had the opportunity through a network to do this thing called the Warriors to Lourdes pilgrimage. So Lourdes, France, there's a shrine there. I'm Catholic. There's a Catholic shrine there, and that at the time, 2017, it was the 59th annual Warriors to Lourdes pilgrimage. So they've been doing this for 59 years, and for the U.S., the Knights of Columbus kind of the ones who sort of are the supporters of military folks having this opportunity to go to Lourdes and do some spiritual healing, some spiritual recovering. And then there's countries all over the world. So I went in 2017, 12 to 15,000 pilgrims from 30 different countries. Not all of them, in fact, very few of them are Catholic. It was really neat to go there and learn about working on spiritual recovery and spiritual resilience. And what I learned from that trip is here in the U.S., I think in maybe the Western culture, we tend to look at spirituality and we go, oh, that's religion. That's actually not true. Religion is an expression of our spirituality.
Yeah.
And so you can go to Lourdes and not be Catholic. You can be an atheist and you can still have a spiritually healing experience. And so that's one of the biggest takeaways from that trip was that in our society we tend to equal spirituality and religion. And what I kind of got from that trip is that religion's a way we express our spirituality. And so an atheist is just as spiritual as I am as a not very good practicing Catholic, and everywhere in between. I mean, they didn't care. You go to Lourdes, they don't say, oh, you're not Catholic, sorry you can't be here. What they will tell you is, please respect the Catholic traditions and the things that are going on with the masses and the different things that go on here, but everybody can come here and get some spiritual healing and progress in your spiritual resilience journey. So it was a really cool opportunity to understand that idea that we are all inherently spiritual, and our spiritual resilience is a big chunk of our resiliency, and that it isn't all tied up in religion. Religion's a way we can express that spirituality. And so it was a really cool opportunity to kind of just think about that. I'm still Catholic and do that thing, but there's a lot of different ways that people express their spirituality. Religion is just one of those. But that is an important aspect of our resilience. So that was a key piece of that trip and having that experience, and then just meeting some people I got to meet, and some of the stories and some of the experiences we got to experience together that were really, really outstanding experiences. And I could tell you, I mean, so many different stories. The Blues Warriors is an important part of my life. That's a disabled veterans hockey team that I became a part of in July of 2020, the height of COVID. Here in Illinois, you couldn't go to hockey rinks and skate. In Missouri, you could go, and if you wore most of your equipment and came in, they had chairs spaced 6 feet apart. You didn't go in the locker rooms, and we skated, and we only had a couple of guys get sick in August of 20 that might have been related to, you still can't prove that it was because we were at the hockey rink. But other than that, we skated 3 times a week, and this team is healing through the sport of hockey for veterans. And so it's been a pretty amazing opportunity. Plus, what a great workout. I love it. I'm addicted to it now. I'd kind of dabbled in it, but I had that opportunity, and it kind of rolls into getting in shape for your life. We have some guys that have really turned around their fitness and getting into shape because they love doing the hockey. We've saved some of my teammates' lives having the team and having the family that the team is. And then there's just something really special about the hockey community that I didn't know about because I only dabbled in it really. I didn't play it in Michigan. I played roller here the first time I was stationed here. I played a very little bit when I was up in Canada with some of the Canadian guys in the military in their Department of National Defense League. But it's just a really awesome piece of my getting in shape for your life pursuits. I'm always trying to figure out how to get better at shooting, and it's a very difficult sport to learn how to play, but it's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of teamwork, a lot of family, a lot of connections, both on the Warriors and then just the general hockey community. I've gotten to meet some of the NHL guys, alumni here in St. Louis, and, imagine when they retire. It's not unlike someone from the military leaving their military career. It's kind of the same. They have more money, they have more options, but it's very regimented life, and then you go to, okay, what now? So each NHL... What?
Excuse me, Buff. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're nearing the end of our podcast time here. And I'm sure Robin may have a few comments or questions she wants to ask. And I have a few. First, I'd let you know that you're talking to someone that lives outside Detroit. I'm in Flat Rock, Michigan.
Okay.
Dave lives up in Shelby. And, of course, I'm an avid Red Wing fan. And I know about the Chicago rivalry. I'm 72, so I've been supporting the Red Wings. And, of course, the University of Michigan. We have some awesome teams here. And I'm glad to see that you're a Red Wing fan and that you found it difficult to wear the Chicago Blackhawks hat. Because I remember back when they were doing the trade, who did we get from Chicago that one time that we've been pursuing? And was
Chelios?
Started with a C.
Yeah, Chelios.
Chelio, yeah, that's who it was. Yeah, That was great. And so I just wanted to put that plug in. And also, of course, to thank you once again for your service. We were so honored to be able to have you as our guest here today. And thanks again. Robin?
Well, absolutely. I want to thank you and everyone, even, Phyllis, Greg, everybody, for all of your service. It deeply, deeply touches me. And, of course, your whole story is amazing, and I'd love to hear everything you have to say. But there are several things that stick with me more than others. And one was that you walked into Afghanistan and you wanted to walk out, and how important that was, that you were respected and given that opportunity, not only for yourself, but that was a part of the way that you were grieving the loss of your friends, is that you wanted to honor them like that. And, you've spoken a lot about your journey of healing, but at the same time, you had a journey of grief. And other than being able to take those steps on their behalf, how have you been able to manage the grief?
Well, every time I tell people that's a journey I'm on for the rest of my life. I'd say recovery, it's really a grief journey as much as the recovery from my physical injuries, and that, our society says, oh, you'll get over it and move on. And I tell people,
no way.
that's not true. We carry those things for the rest of our lives, and that's okay. I try to tell people that's okay. You're going to have days where it's going to hit you more. The anniversary of the crash is a big day for me. When I was on active duty, I took that day as a day of leave. I'm like, there's no way I'm coming into work unless there's a crisis I have to be there for. And it shows as a senior leader in the Air Force, it shows, hey, acknowledge the stuff that you're carrying, and that's where the connections and the resilience is important. That you got to lean on the people. Who do you go to when there's bad news? Who do you go to when there's good news? And how do you cultivate those relationships? How do you do that for other people? And then I tell people, every time I tell this story, I thank folks. So I can thank you guys today, because it helps me heal. It helps me walk that grief journey. Another significant part of that is the pictures of me playing hockey that are in this presentation. If you look down at the bottom, the words where the words are, there's a picture of me I'm on the right in the picture. In the middle is a lady, and then my housemate Tracy is the one on the left. That lady in the black jersey is Phyllis's oldest sister, Kathy. And so Phyllis grew up in Chicago. Actually, her husband Dave is from Dearborn, so there's a Michigan connection in all of this. But Phyllis grew up there. She was 6 of 7 kids, and they're pretty athletic. So the crash happens, and her siblings are looking for ways to raise money to have their kids, because they're all adults, their adult children attend Phyllis's funeral at the Air Force Academy, because that's where she had been stationed before she deployed. And so I saw that, and I was sitting, at lunch stool trying to figure out what can I do to my folks that we lost. What can I do to honor them? And I saw that, so I shared their GoFundMe for their Phyllis's nieces and nephews. And so Kathy saw that, so she reaches out to me and she says, "Hey, can I call you?" And this is Phyllis's oldest sister, and I was kind of concerned about what would happen. Was she going to yell at me? Was she going to blame me? Was she going to? No, she wanted to thank me for doing that. And so that started our friendship, Kathy is my BFF, and always will be. We have done trips together. She's who I spend 11 October with, unless I'm hiking Mount Kilimanjaro and doing my Air Force retirement, which I did in 2018. She didn't go on that trip with me. We did that over the anniversary of the crash. So Kathy and I have walked our grief journey together from the beginning. And so I got her to try hockey a few years back, and she loved it. And her husband's like, great, let's go get her the gear if this helps her, because it is not easy to lose a sibling. It's not easy to lose anybody. And he saw that as something that could help her. Well, she just turned 65 last week, and she is playing in a women's hockey league up in Chicago. In fact, her team played in the playoffs of their division. She's in the low, not the most skilled, but she's out there playing hockey. And so that picture is with her at some point when she came down here, because they come down here every so often, and I've less often go up there. But she's gone with me to Germany when I did my retirement trip to Germany. She's gone with me when we went and saw the Cubs and the Cardinals play in London. And so she is my BFF and will never not be my BFF. Why? Because we grieve her sister and we kind of walk that journey together.
That is beautiful.
So that's kind of an important part of it. It's so many different things. It's a recognition that it's something that I'm always going to be doing. It's little things like Phyllis and Greg's rank and career field badges are in the back hem of my my hockey jerseys for the Blues Warriors. They're always with me. They always have my 6. And so they're in the hem of those. When I'm wearing my uniform, I have their rank and career field badges inside the pocket of my uniform. I carry that with me. When I go to church somewhere not local, like when I went to Chicago earlier this year, I went to Mass at the cathedral there, and I lit candles for them. I light 4 candles. My mom, my Air Force mom, Phyllis and Greg, my guardian angels.
Yes.
I do things to honor them. This whole speaking thing is to honor them. I don't do it to make money. When I do speaking engagements, I don't charge a speaker's fee. I do it for the impact and for honoring Phyllis and Greg and the heroes in the story of this helicopter crash. So those are ways that I do that. Now, I cannot listen to On Eagle's Wings without losing my mind, because that song reminds me of them. When I went to that Lord's pilgrimage, we got to go to a Mass in the grotto where the shrine is for this, and it was an English-speaking Mass, and there was the Irish cadet choir, the Irish military cadet choir, and just one young lady who's now married. She's in the Irish military. Her and I are friends on Facebook. She sang that. She had a solo of that song, and I cried. And I tell people that stuff's okay. I know I'm going to be emotional. If I go to church and that happens to be one of the songs, I know it's going to bring me to tears. Those are okay. You have to feel what you feel. You have to experience those emotions because they matter, because they're there. And if we don't experience those things, and doing them in a constructive way leads to, if I ignore all of that, it's still there, and it's going to kind of ripple underneath the surface and maybe come out in less good ways if I don't acknowledge those things and know that, that's gonna make me sad, or something will hit me, and I just know it's just part of it. It's absolutely part of it, and it's absolutely okay to be human. And so I think that's what I do. And again, I talk about them, I honor them, and I started the scholarship at Michigan. So I started a scholarship at the University of Michigan the year after I graduated. The night of the crash, when I was there at Bagram, I was thinking about what can I do to honor Phyllis and Greg, the very question you asked me. And I decided I could turn my scholarship into a memorial award and scholarship. So now last week I was home in Michigan to present that at the ROTC Awards night. It's an Air Force officer sword. It's the Major Phyllis Pelkey, Master Sergeant Greg Coos Wings the Soar Memorial Award, and it has the year inscribed on that cadet's sword. So they receive an Air Force officer sword with that on it. Not their name, but Phyllis and Greg's names. So
oh my gosh, that is so beautiful.
And then I write a check out of my checkbook. I write them the check, which is the scholarship part that I've been doing since 1992. So it's those ways of carrying them forward and talking about them. Every time I share this story, I'm honoring them. I'm honoring the people that are the heroes of that story. So it's not something that I'm ever going to get over, but I do write by them. You know, I share. It's important to me to share what were we doing over there, because I think it had value. I think their lives were not lost in an unnecessary way. Tragic, but I do not believe it was unnecessary. I think we made an impact. I look around and when I look at our society and I look at patriotism and go, that's Phyllis and Greg. You know, one of the things I talk about in my presentations is that one of the greatest strength of this country is the people. Yes, we may be very divided right now. A lot of things are going on that are polarizing, but at the end of the day, what is going to carry us through that is the people. And Phyllis and Greg, we represent their belief in their country, that they decided to go do that deployment and ultimately give their life in that deployment for what we believe in this country. And so I look at it that way, and just try to celebrate that when I can.
Well, I certainly celebrate that with you. Again, we thank you. We thank them. We thank your mom, your Renee mom, and we thank all the people who saved you and helped you have a quality of life, and for all the choices you continue to make. And please let us know in the show notes how people can make donations to that scholarship. And also, you mentioned watches. If those watches are available, please include a link to that, so that when people listen to this, we can do our part to continue the legacy that you have so much inspired today with you being on this show. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, and so go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to come to the end of the show, so if there's some further remarks you'd like to make, I do invite you to do that now.
Okay. I do want to wrap up. At the end of every presentation, I have one slide that after I talk about all my stuff and I tell all my stories and my takeaways, there's a slide that I put up that I saw while I was over there in my deployment. We lost a C-130 that had crashed, and my community was grieving. This is a couple weeks before my crash. And there's a slide. It's got Snoopy and Charlie Brown sitting on a dock looking out across a lake, and there's stars. And it says, sometimes we need someone to simply be there, not to fix anything or to do anything in particular, but just to let us feel that we are cared for and supported. And that quote is attributed to Unknown. I think that's really, really, really important to everything with what you guys do, with the podcast and the people you speak to and the people I speak to, is that it isn't always about doing something. Sometimes it's about how do people know we're there for them? How do we let people know that we care for them and we support them? How do we feel that from the people that we think care for and support us? It's a really important with a lot of people who are, go-getters in the world and all of that do. Sometimes are you creating an environment where people think that you're there for them? Not that you're fixing something specifically, but that you care for and support the people in your life. How do you do that? How do we help each other be our best selves? How do we help each other reach our potential? How do we help each other overcome the tough stuff and celebrate the good stuff? And so that kind of thought is what I leave people with when I finish my presentations.
Well, we certainly thank you for that, and that is the goal of the Believe Me movement. And you've been listening to Buff, and you can read all about her. There's a lot to be said. She certainly doesn't brag by any stretch of the imagination. She has quite a biography. So thank you so much for being on our show. This show, the Believe Me Movement, is a safe place for anyone to come on and share your story. We look forward to having you being a guest. If you would like to be a guest on the Believe Me Movement podcast, you can email me, spiritlady.robin@gmail.com, spiritlady.robin@gmail.com. This show is brought to you by my website, robinalexis.com. That's robinalexis.com. And we certainly look forward to sharing your story, Buff, and to supporting you in the scholarship, and certainly know some people who are going to be buying watches. And every time I look at that watch that I'm going to buy for myself, I'm going to think of you and the courage that you have and how you have walked out of a crash, didn't even remember doing it, somehow started to remember and chose to choose love and keep it going. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You bet.
Thank you both very much.
Over and out.
Over and out.